because I feel like taking away food has become a badge of honor in some ways, that that's the solution. And the stricter we become, there's just this weird link with food, I think, that we're always riding that really fine line on it. But it also becomes part of the problem, because it's not socially okay to be the person at work who can't eat the meal that's being served, or having to ask for the special thing at the wedding that you're going to, or trying to give your mother-in-law a crazy list of things and saying, this is what I need to do for Thanksgiving dinner. And having it go wrong anyways while everyone's grumbling that you're that person. It's so socially, mentally, and emotionally hard with that when we are required to eat on a regular basis to stay alive as a human being. And I think especially because we're taping this during the COVID pandemic, I'm seeing that more and more people, the stress around food is becoming even harder because we can't access it in the same way that we normally did. You can't just pop out and grab something necessarily. So all of a sudden it's becoming, I think it's coming to the forefront on that this is not a sustainable way of doing things. So it really is one of my passions that it's not that I want people to be eating bucket loads of pasta or having cake all the time, but I also don't think it's great that every time someone has a bite of pasta at their in-laws' house, that they know that they're going to suffer. And because it often doesn't have to be that way either.
There is a time and a place for the elimination diet, and it can be used quite appropriately to bring someone back to a state of health. So how do you use this in your clinical practice?
So there's different sort of eliminations that we use for different people depending on what is going on. But most commonly we do a 2-week elimination program where they're getting sort of the what to eat, what not to eat, and menu planners and recipes and how to deal with flavor and how to do it if you're vegan and all of those sorts of things. So you sort of get all the resources that you need. You do it for a couple weeks. And then we see if people are feeling better. Because if it's happening around the gut stuff, because food is so intimately connected both with the gut itself and all those bacteria that live there, the changes actually happen very, very quickly for people. So most people, I give them up to 2 weeks to do the program. A lot of people will be feeling better a lot more quickly. And then we often do have people continue for another 2 to 4 weeks while we start to work on the gut microbiota. And that again is through food or what we call strain-specific probiotics that have been specifically studied for this, or sort of gut healing side of things, or looking if there's nutrient deficiencies. But we actually do continue for another 2 to 4 weeks in most cases if patients can handle that. And I do actually hear from most people that when it's put into those sorts of timelines, it's not impossible. When you kind of think about it as this is what I have to do for my entire life, that's a different thing. But in concentrated times, people are actually quite good with it. But we continue with it for a bit longer because we actually see that starving the bacteria or changing the gut environment and the irritants that can be going in, if we change that, it can actually allow for the bacteria to shift a little bit. So things that we've seen in the research, that it can lower some inflammation for a short period of time if we do it, or it can lower something called histamine, which we think about around allergies, or it can just stop some of the physical irritation that's happening to the gut. So we give it a little bit of a chance to take hold. And then once we move through that 4 to 6 week period of elimination, we actually start a really specific reintroduction of test food. So if we were looking at something like taking out fructose, we might consider bringing back honey or mango in really specific amounts.
And so for me, I think the most important thing that you said, and I think for everyone listening, is that food is still the primary element that we want to work with, but it's also everything around it in terms of supporting that gut health, looking at that microbiome, addressing those
Mhm.
nutritional deficiencies. And so it becomes such a complex picture that it's never just about one thing.
It's not. The good thing is, if we're looking at it from a population perspective, most people who have gut issues have irritable bowel syndrome. And that's the one that has the least damage that's happened. So, unfortunately, we are looking at some studies up to about a quarter of women actually have this in a sort of diagnosed way. And I think there's other women who probably have it who don't. But
Mhm.
upwards of, in general, 20% of the Canadian population will have something that falls into that category. So there's less of the healing and repair and stuff that's happening, a lot of the gut bacteria stuff that's happening. But, and then when we go into things like inflammatory bowel disease, where there's actually significant damage that's happened in most cases, and very, very significant nutrient deficiencies and losses that have happened. That is something that definitely takes much, much more time to deal with.
Mhm.
But that's less of the population that we're looking at.
Mhm.
So I do find it's actually kind of funny, because as much as people don't want to do an elimination and take foods out, sometimes it's actually harder to convince people to try the reintroduction, because all of a sudden they're feeling so much better. And
Mhm.
they know why, because we go through the education so much on this. We really focus on it, but and I'm quite convincing. So it is something I actually find it harder to convince people to bring things back sometimes
Mhm.
than to actually take things away. But I think if we're educated, and this is not an area that is difficult to educate patients on. It is, I sometimes feel like it's really quite simple, actually. And when people understand, it's much easier to make those choices and to feel like there's actually hope. And that's amazing.